friendship, trust, and betrayal. Three words that should never belong in the same story, yet tonight they do. It began like any ordinary evening. A group of friends gathered, laughter spilling over cheap beer and shared memories. But before dawn, one of them, Sam Nordquist, would vanish. No witnesses, no crime scene, no body, just a trail of silence stretching across decades. For years, his disappearance was dismissed as a runaway story. But those who knew Sam, his family, his fiancée, his colleagues, never believed that. And they were right, because decades later, new evidence surfaced. And what it revealed was not the story of a man who left, but of a man who was erased. A secret buried deep among people he trusted most, hidden behind loyalty, fear, and lies that outlasted the years. Was it an accident? A cover-up? Or something darker? A pact sealed in silence? Tonight, we reopen that cold case. We trace every false lead, every vanished clue, and every friendship that turned fatal. And by the end of this story, you'll see why some disappearances aren't acts of fate. They're decisions made in the dark. But before we begin, if you believe in truth over silence, if you believe every mystery deserves its ending, then take a second to like this video, share it with someone who loves true crime, and subscribe to Dark Truth 25. Because here, we don't just tell stories. We unearth the buried ones. This is the story of Sam Nordquist, the friend who vanished, and the truth that refused to stay buried. Small towns have a rhythm, predictable, familiar, and safe. At least, that's what everyone in Clearwater, Minnesota, believed in the fall of 1998. It was a community where doors stayed unlocked and everyone knew whose car was parked at the local bar. But all that changed one cold October night, when Sam Nordquist, a quiet, dependable man, simply never came home. Sam was 32 years old. He worked as a maintenance technician at a nearby lumber mill. He loved fishing, old rock records, and Sunday dinners with his mother, Margaret. His friend described him as the peacekeeper, someone who avoided fights, who helped anyone without expecting thanks. But that kindness would soon cost him everything. On October 17th, Sam met two friends, Evan Harker and Dylan Price, at the Rusty Lantern, a dimly lit roadside bar known for cheap beer and louder stories. The trio were close, childhood friends who'd seen each other through breakups, new jobs, and the occasional bar brawl. Witnesses said they laughed, played pool, and ordered wings, nothing unusual. But around 10:45 p.m., the tone shifted. The bartender noticed them arguing near the jukebox, something about money or maybe a woman. No one caught every word, but Evan slammed his drink down hard enough to crack the glass. Moments later, the three men walked out together into the frost-covered night. That was the last time anyone saw Sam Nordquist alive. 3 days later, hunters spotted his pickup truck half-submerged at the edge of Lone Birch Lake, 6 miles from town. The driver's door was locked, the keys missing, and the truck had no damage, suggesting a crash. Inside, Sam's wallet, a half-empty coffee thermos, and his favorite flannel jacket, neatly folded on the passenger seat. The sheriff's office launched a full search. Divers combed the lake. Dogs followed faint trails that went cold just 20 feet from the shoreline. It was as if the ground itself had swallowed him. Reporters arrived. Flyers covered telephone poles. His mother's voice cracked on local TV. Sam doesn't run from people. If he was alive, he'd have called. Something happened out there. Police questioned Evan and Dylan separately. Their stories didn't align. Evan said Sam had been quiet and left early, saying he needed air. Dylan claimed they all drove off together, until Sam asked to be dropped at a gas station. But surveillance footage from that gas station never showed him. As detectives pressed harder, timelines shifted by minutes, then hours. Evan's phone data placed him within 2 miles of Lone Birch Lake around 11:15 p.m., right when Sam would have been driving home. Yet Evan insisted he was asleep by then. Whispers started to circulate. Some said jealousy over money. Others hinted at an affair. But no one could prove anything. And as winter rolled in, the case froze with the lake. Years passed. Sam's mother refused to move his belongings. His room remained untouched, the clock still set to 10:47 p.m. the time he was last seen leaving the bar. But justice, like the truth, has a way of resurfacing. And decades later, when new construction began on a section of highway near that same lake, something unearthed would bring the case back to life and expose just how far friendship can go before it turns fatal. Every missing person case begins with the same question: who saw them last? For Sam Nordquist, that answer pointed directly to two people, his closest friends, Evan Harker and Dylan Price. Both were interviewed multiple times after Sam's truck was discovered, but the inconsistencies in their stories grew more tangled with each session. Detectives noted it right away. Evan was defensive cold. Dylan, on the other hand, couldn't stop talking. He tried too hard to sound helpful, even casual. But as the sheriff later said, people who lie don't forget the truth. They just keep changing it until it fits the story they want to tell. Evan claimed that after leaving the bar, Sam said he needed to clear his head, that he was upset about an unpaid debt from a coworker. But Dylan told investigators a different story, that Sam had mentioned a woman, someone from the past. That discrepancy was enough to reopen the case file after only 3 days. As detectives dug deeper, the narrative around Sam's life began to unravel. He wasn't the quiet, simple man everyone thought. There were rumors of a secret loan, thousands of dollars lent to Evan months before his disappearance. There was also talk of an affair, that Sam had been seeing someone married, someone close to one of his friends. The problem? No proof, just whispers and shadows. Police ran fingerprint analysis on the truck. Only Sam's prints and faint, partial smudges that couldn't be matched. His phone records into the night he vanished. But the biggest clue came from something most people overlooked: the gas station camera. Evan and Dylan both claimed they stopped there before parting ways. But the footage told a different story. Only 2 men were seen in the car. Sam wasn't one of them. That discovery changed everything. Detectives realized the last confirmed sighting of Sam was outside the Rusty Lantern, not hours later, as his friends had claimed. Investigators brought Evan and Dylan in again for questioning. Under pressure, Dylan cracked. He admitted they argued that night. Sam had accused Evan of lying about money, a confrontation that turned heated. Dylan said Evan pushed Sam near the car, that he stumbled but got up fine. But the sheriff wasn't convinced. He pressed harder, and Dylan's tone shifted. He paused, looked down, and muttered, "It all happened too fast." Still, without a body, the case couldn't move forward. Forensic teams searched Lone Birch Lake again, this time expanding to the surrounding woods. They found tire tracks near a service road, tracks matching Evan's truck. But snow had long erased any chance of proving when they'd been made. Sam's mother, Margaret Nordquist, kept calling the station every week. Her voice grew weaker, but her message stayed the same. "Don't forget him. Please don't let them forget my boy." By spring, the case went cold. Evan and Dylan moved away. The file was boxed and shelved, another small-town mystery frozen by time. But decades later, when the state announced plans to widen the highway cutting through the woods near Lone Birch Lake, heavy machinery would soon dig into soil that hadn't been touched since 1998. And what they found there would rewrite everything everyone thought they knew about friendship, loyalty, and lies buried deep beneath ice and time. Shadows of friendship. Friendship, it's supposed to be the one bond you can trust. But in every case like this, there's always a moment when that trust cracks. And for Sam Nordquist, that moment came long before he vanished. Investigators revisiting the case years later began piecing together fragments the original detectives missed, fragments hidden in old statements, forgotten call logs, and memories people had tried to bury. It turned out that in the months before his disappearance, Sam had been in trouble, not legally, but personally. He had lent a large sum of money to one of his closest friends, Evan Harker, to help with a business deal gone wrong. But the repayment never came. Sam's coworkers later told police that he'd been tense and quiet, mentioning he was done being used. He even said something chilling just 2 weeks before he disappeared. "Some friends aren't who they say they are." That line would haunt everyone who heard it. When police reopened the cold case decades later, they found old voice messages preserved on Sam's mother's answering machine, recordings she'd kept for comfort. One of them, dated 2 days before the night he vanished, featured a man's voice, low and urgent, saying, "Sam, we need to talk. Don't tell anyone. Just meet me by the lake." The voice was never publicly confirmed, but forensic analysts suggested it was likely Evans. As detectives started following the trail, something else emerged. Dylan Price, the other friend from that night, had left town just months after the disappearance. He'd relocated to Wisconsin, changed jobs, and cut off nearly all contact. When investigators tracked him down decades later, his reaction said everything. He froze when shown photos of the lake excavation site. He asked, "Did you find it?" before anyone mentioned what it was. And that slip, that one word, reignited the entire investigation. Detectives obtained court orders to search old family properties once owned by Evan's father, particularly a small storage unit near the original highway construction zone. Inside, they found something that stopped everyone cold: an old box labeled tools. Inside that box were a set of car keys, partially rusted, later confirmed to belong to Sam's pickup truck. Alongside them, a faded photo of the three friends, smiling, with the words "The Crew, 1995" scribbled on the back. But the most disturbing discovery wasn't the keys or the photo. It was a single piece of paper tucked underneath. A map of the area around Lone Birch Lake, marked with a red X. The X sat precisely where, 45 years later, highway workers would uncover something horrifying during construction: a buried section of earth containing human remains encased in compacted soil and ice. For forensic experts, it was a breakthrough. DNA confirmed it. The remains were Sam Nordquist. The discovery sent a shockwave through Clearwater. Families who had lived through the mystery for decades gathered outside the police station, holding candles in the cold night air. But for investigators, the question wasn't where he was anymore. It was why. Why had two friends covered up a death for more than 4 decades? And why had no one spoken, even when the guilt must have eaten them alive? What followed were days of interrogation and confession, not in the typical sense, but in pieces, letters, and journal entries found later. One entry from Evan's old notebook read, "It was an accident. We just wanted him to calm down. The lake was supposed to keep the secret." That single line shattered the illusion of loyalty that had defined their friendship. Decades of silence, years of pretending, and one grave mistake that froze in time, until modern construction and DNA science brought it all back. In the end, friendship didn't save Sam. It destroyed him. And as one detective later said in a press briefing, "You can bury the truth. You can cover it in dirt, ice, and time. But eventually, it digs itself out. DNA, it doesn't forget." The discovery of the remains should have been the end of the story. But for investigators, it was just the beginning. When the remains believed to be Sam Nordquist were unearthed, they were nearly unrecognizable. Bones fragmented by decades of frost and compression, bits of rusted metal fused into the soil. The kind of burial that wasn't planned, but hurried. Detectives immediately sent the samples to the state forensic lab. The process took months. DNA degradation after 45 years made it almost impossible to extract usable data. But technology had evolved, and with the help of genetic genealogy, something remarkable happened. A match appeared in the database. It linked directly to a woman named Marissa Nordquist, Sam's niece, born years after he vanished. Her DNA, submitted for an unrelated ancestry search, had finally answered a question her family had lived with their entire lives. "It's him," the technician whispered. "After 45 years, it's really him." The confirmation shattered the illusion of mystery that lingered over Clearwater for generations. But what it uncovered next, that was even darker. When DNA tied the remains to Sam, investigators went back to reanalyze the evidence from the storage unit, the keys, the map, and microscopic residue found on them. Using advanced spectrometry, they detected traces of blood, not just Sam's, but another individual's. That second DNA profile matched none other than Evan Harker, the very friend who'd urged Sam to meet at the lake the night he vanished. It meant one of two things. Either Evan had been present when Sam died, or he had helped move the body afterward. When confronted, Evan didn't deny knowing about the burial, but he insisted it wasn't murder. He described that night in a broken voice. He was angry. We fought. He slipped. He hit his head on the rock. Dylan panicked, we both did. But the evidence told a slightly different story. Sam's skull bore 2 fractures, one consistent with a fall, the other with blunt force trauma delivered afterward. That second strike, that was no accident. The coroner's report turned the case from a tragic accident to a homicide investigation. And suddenly, after 45 years, justice had a new name, Sam Nordquist. But it wasn't just justice that returned. It was guilt, memories, and ghosts. Evan confessed that for decades, he couldn't drive past the highway without feeling sick. He admitted to hearing Sam's voice in dreams. And when asked why he never came forward, he said, "We thought the snow would keep him. We thought the lake would stay quiet forever." For the town, the revelation was devastating. Clearwater had moved on. New stores, new roads, new families. But beneath that progress lay the bones of a man whose only mistake was trusting his friends. Residents began leaving flowers near the construction site, the place now called Nordquist Point. Children who grew up hearing ghost stories about the vanishing friend finally learned that the legend was real, and that truth had been frozen just beneath their feet. Forensic scientists later said this case changed how small departments viewed cold cases. Because even after decades, after time, weather and memory had erased everything, DNA remembered. It didn't care about secrets. It didn't care about guilt, fear, or silence. DNA told the story exactly as it was. And as one detective remarked during the press conference, his words echoed across the crowd. Time can bury the truth, but science will always dig it up. But even as the world finally knew what happened to Sam Nordquist, one question still lingered like fog over the frozen lake. If it was an accident, why did they hide it? The confession that changed everything. They say time heals all wounds. But in Clearwater, time only preserved them, buried under guilt, silence, and the thick frost of forgotten promises. After the DNA revelation, the investigation shifted from discovery to accountability. 2 men, once friends, once brothers in spirit, were now suspects in a murder that had slept for nearly half a century. Evan Harker had already confessed to being there. But when detectives pressed further, his story began to fracture, just like the ice that covered the lake that fateful night. He said Sam fell. He said it was an accident. He said Dylan panicked. But when shown the autopsy results, the 2 fractures, the evidence of defensive wounds, Evan froze. His hands trembled as he stared at the photos. Then, after nearly 10 minutes of silence, he whispered, "He didn't fall. Dylan hit him first." The room fell silent. Detectives exchanged glances, knowing this was the break they'd waited decades for. Evan explained that Sam had been threatening to expose something about money missing from a joint business venture the 3 men shared in 1978. Sam had discovered falsified invoices, and when he confronted Dylan, an argument broke out by the lake. It escalated quickly. Words became shouts. Shouts became violence. "I tried to stop him," Evan said. "But by the time I did, it was already done." Evan claimed that after Sam's death, Dylan insisted they hide the body, that no one would believe it was an accident. Fear took over. They loaded Sam's body into the back of his own car, drove off-road, and buried both beneath an unfinished construction site before the winter freeze set in. Then they made a pact, a dark, unspoken promise that would last 45 years. For the next 4 decades, Evan lived quietly, married, raised 2 children, even volunteered in church. But the past never stopped whispering. Every time a cold wind came through the valley, every time he passed a construction site, the memory resurfaced. And now, finally, he said it aloud. "I see him sometimes, in my dreams. He's standing by the lake, asking why I didn't help." The police took his full statement, recording every trembling word. But there was still one man missing, Dylan Reeves, the last piece of the puzzle. When investigators tracked him down in Arizona, he was 78 years old, frail, unwell, and nearly blind. At first, he denied everything. Then, when confronted with Evan's confession and the forensic evidence, something in him cracked. "We didn't mean to kill him," he muttered. It was supposed to scare him. He wouldn't stop shouting. I swung once, and he stopped moving. His words chilled the room. There was no satisfaction in the confession, only regret, exhaustion, and a hollow ache of time lost. But even in truth, justice faced its limits. With both suspects, now elderly and statutes of limitations on certain charges expired, prosecutors faced an agonizing choice: file charges for manslaughter and concealment, or close the case with a formal confession. In the end, Dylan was placed under custodial care and died a few months later, never stepping foot in court. Evan, burdened by his own admission, agreed to public testimony for educational use in cold case training programs. He wanted to warn others, to tell them that silence doesn't protect you, it destroys you slowly, year after year. The town gathered once more at Nordquist Point, where the remains had been found. For the first time, Sam Nordquist's name was spoken not as a ghost story, but as a man whose truth finally found daylight. His family buried him with full honors, a modest service under a silver sky. No grand speeches, no headlines, just closure. A detective later said something that captured the moment perfectly. Sometimes justice isn't about punishment. It's about peace. And in Clearwater, for the first time in 45 years, peace finally came. But for those who carried the secret, peace would never mean freedom. Because when you bury the truth that deep, you don't just hide a body. You bury yourself beside it. The echoes of truth. When the story broke, Clearwater was never the same again. What began as a whisper, a cold case closed after 4.5 decades, became a storm that spread across the nation. News anchors used words like unbelievable, chilling, closure after 45 years. But for those who lived in the town, it wasn't closure. It was reopening an old wound they'd never fully let heal. The day after the confession went public, crowds gathered near the site where Sam's car had been unearthed. Reporters hovered like vultures, cameras flashing as yellow tape fluttered in the wind. Locals brought flowers, old friends came forward with long-forgotten photos, and people who had barely known Sam claimed they'd always suspected something. Inside Sam's childhood home, his sister Elaine Nordquist sat quietly at the kitchen table, the same table where her parents had once waited, watching the clock, hoping Sam would walk back through the door. She looked at the headlines and whispered, "Everyone says we got justice, but it doesn't feel like justice. It feels like a ghost came home." The police department, meanwhile, was flooded with calls, some congratulating their persistence, others accusing them of incompetence for letting the case go unsolved so long. Detective Mara Ellison, who had reopened the file 2 years earlier, stood in front of the press with calm resolve. She said, "This case isn't just about evidence. It's about endurance, about how truth waits, quietly, until someone's ready to face it." But while the public celebrated, others struggled in silence. Evan Harker's family faced scrutiny and shame. His grown daughter was hounded by reporters. His wife refused to speak to anyone for weeks. At church, people avoided eye contact. Whispers followed them through grocery aisles and parking lots. Even in confession, the shadow of guilt never lifted. Then came the interviews, documentaries, podcasts, headlines calling Sam's death the betrayal among friends. Some painted the story as a tragic accident, others as premeditated evil. But no one could deny the eerie coincidences, the dreams Evan described, the chilling accuracy of the anonymous tip that led police to the dig site, and the haunting detail that Sam's watch had still been ticking when they uncovered him. The mechanism frozen by rust, but its hands locked forever at 11:47 p.m., the time they believed he died. Locals began calling that place Nordquist Hollow. Some claimed they could still hear footsteps near the old site at night, slow, heavy steps across the gravel. Others said their dogs refused to go near it. Superstition or not, people stopped driving that stretch of road after dark. Even passing by felt wrong, like the air held something unfinished. But beyond the fear, there was also reflection. Sam's story became a lesson about friendship, trust, and how truth doesn't die, even when those who buried it grow old. Local schools began teaching the Nordquist case in criminology seminars. It inspired new laws on unsolved cases, expanding the reach of forensic cold case units across the state. And somewhere in the quiet of his small Minnesota home, a retired forensic technician, the same one who had first examined Sam's case back in 1978, watched the coverage, shook his head, and said softly, "We always thought time would erase what we couldn't prove. Turns out time preserved it." As the final press conference closed, the town fell silent once more. There were no more suspects to chase, no more mysteries to solve, only the echo of a man's life that had finally been heard again. Still, some couldn't let go. Every few nights, someone would leave a candle at the site, its light flickering against the wind. And every anniversary, Elaine would visit with fresh flowers and whisper, "You're home now, Sam, but I still wish you just called that night." The camera pans over the empty stretch of highway, snow beginning to fall, covering tire tracks, footprints, and the scars left by years of searching. Justice had come, yes, but it came too late. And in Clearwater, everyone learned that when you bury truth beneath friendship, it never stays buried. It waits for the right time to rise. The legend of Sam Nordquist. The truth was finally out, but the world wasn't done with Sam Nordquist. In the months that followed, his story transformed from a local tragedy into something bigger, a phenomenon. Every news outlet wanted a piece of it. True crime shows dramatized the story, podcasters debated every detail, and internet sleuths built elaborate theories connecting Sam's case to other disappearances across the Midwest. For the first time in decades, Clearwater, a quiet town that once wanted to forget, became a destination. Tour buses rolled through the old highway where Sam's car was unearthed. TikTok creators filmed themselves near the dig site, whispering into cameras about the road that betrayed its own. A true crime convention even hosted a panel titled "The Vanished Friend: When Loyalty Kills." But in the noise of viral fascination, something important began to fade: the man behind the mystery. Sam Nordquist wasn't just a headline. He was a son, a brother, a friend. He loved baseball, built furniture in his spare time, and used to volunteer at the local shelter on weekends. His sister, Elaine, said in one interview, "It's strange hearing strangers talk about him like a character in a show. He wasn't a story. He was my family." Yet even she admitted that the case, now reopened, re-examined, retold, had given her a strange kind of peace. Not because justice was perfect, but because silence had finally broken. Meanwhile, digital forums obsessed over the timeline. Why had no one searched the construction zone more thoroughly back in 1978? How had the car remained preserved beneath layers of concrete and soil? Forensic experts explained, a sinkhole had formed under a disused access road, swallowing the car slowly over time. When new highway construction began decades later, it was that same unstable ground that gave way, revealing the wreck like a frozen capsule of guilt. Inside the car, they found Sam's wristwatch, his jacket still folded neatly on the passenger seat, and a photograph wedged into the dashboard. 3 smiling men by a lake. Sam, Evan, Dylan. A memory turned monument to betrayal. But even as the facts came out, something else began to happen. People started reporting strange things near the site, odd occurrences that blurred the line between crime and the supernatural. Construction workers said their machinery stalled inexplicably when nearing the edge of the dig. A local journalist claimed her camera battery drained every time she filmed near the marker. And one night, a truck driver swore he saw a figure walking along the roadside, pale, barefoot, disappearing when he flashed his headlights. The logical mind says coincidence. But in a town haunted for 45 years, the imagination doesn't need much to come alive. Stories spread that Sam's spirit lingered, not for vengeance, but for closure. Others claimed it was a warning to those who conceal the truth, that guilt, once buried, eventually unearths itself. Amid the fascination, the sheriff's office released a public statement urging people to stop trespassing at the site, reminding everyone that what happened there was real and tragic. Still, the story refused to fade. True crime panels dissected it as a case study in psychological guilt. Mystery forums debated if premonition dreams were possible. And through it all, Sam Nordquist became both a man remembered and a myth reborn. Elaine, who rarely spoke publicly, gave one final interview to a local documentary crew. They asked her if she believed Sam was still here, in some way, watching. She smiled faintly and said, "I don't know, but I do know the truth finally found him. Maybe that's what ghosts really are, truths waiting to be told." The interviewer thanked her. As she stood to leave, she placed a small photograph on Sam's memorial, the same photo of the three friends at the lake. For a moment, the camera lingers, and if you look closely, the reflection in the frame shows three silhouettes again, one faintly behind the others. The case was solved, but the story? The story had only just begun to live. In every person who heard it, every question left unanswered, every whisper of a friendship gone wrong. The weight of silence. When the cameras left Clearwater, something strange happened. The noise stopped, but the silence grew louder. The town had become famous overnight, its story broadcast worldwide. But once the lights dimmed, people were left to face what fame really meant. The weight of truth and the echoes of guilt that never fade. In the months following the confession, small cracks appeared in the lives of those left behind. Evan Harker's daughter, Leah, spoke publicly for the first time, saying, "People look at me like I'm part of the crime, but I was just a kid. I didn't even know who my father really was." She said she'd spent years wondering why her dad avoided the lake, why he flinched when a car door slammed, why he never talked about his youth. Now, she understood, and forgiveness, she said, wasn't as easy as people think. Meanwhile, Elaine Nordquist turned her brother's story into something more than pain. She founded the Sam Nordquist Foundation, dedicated to funding cold case investigations across Minnesota. Within a year, her efforts helped reopen 7 dormant cases, giving other families what she had fought half her life to find: answers. Reporters called it the Clearwater Effect, a reminder that silence, though comfortable, is never justice. Yet, not everyone wanted answers. Some townspeople grew tired of the attention. They said it brought too many outsiders, too many reminders. Old friendships broke. Local businesses shut down as people couldn't bear being asked, "Did you know them?" Clearwater had once been a quiet town of 3,000. Now it was a living museum of betrayal. But deeper than the social wounds were the psychological scars. For those who had lived with secrets or suspicions for 45 years, the truth didn't bring relief. It brought exposure. The bartender from that night in 1978, now in her 70s, admitted in a rare interview that she had always felt something was off. "He didn't look drunk when he left. He looked scared," she said. "I told myself not to get involved. Now I wish I had." That's the thing about silence. It doesn't erase guilt. It multiplies it. Psychologists who studied the case later coined the term collective guilt syndrome to describe Clearwater's strange transformation, how an entire town carried fragments of responsibility without ever committing a crime. They said the Nordquist case proved a chilling truth. When lies last long enough, they stop belonging to one person. They belong to everyone who looked away. Across the country, true crime enthusiasts dissected every moment of the story, but criminologists focused on something else: the psychology of friendship and deception. Dr. Amelia Ross, a forensic behaviorist, wrote in her journal, "Friendship crimes are among the most haunting, because when a friend kills, they don't just destroy a life. They destroy trust in the very idea of closeness." And for Evan Harker, the surviving accomplice, that trust had been his punishment long before the police arrived. He lived out his final days in assisted care, spending hours staring at the window overlooking a frozen pond. One nurse recalled him whispering, "Sometimes I still see the headlights." In the end, the case of Sam Nordquist wasn't just about murder, or even justice. It was about the corrosion of silence, how lies eat through generations like rust on steel. And it was about how truth, once revealed, doesn't heal neatly. It leaves scars that glint under the light, reminding us that peace comes not from forgetting, but from facing what we fear most. Today, the stretch of road where Sam's car was found has been renamed Nordquist Way. A plaque sits by the shoulder, in memory of those who vanish and those who never stopped searching. Locals still leave flowers there, not for the crime, not even for the man, but for the truth finally spoken. Because in the end, it wasn't the discovery that changed Clearwater. It was the courage to finally say what no one had dared to for 45 years. Truth is heavy, but silence weighs even more. When truth becomes legend. It started small, a local headline, a few news clips, then a viral thread on social media. Within days, the world knew the name Sam Nordquist. The discovery of his car, the confession from one of his oldest friends didn't just close a case. It opened 1,000 doors. And behind each one, another version of the truth. Podcasters picked it up first. Titles like The Lost Friend of Clearwater and Murder Under the Lake climbed the charts. Amateur detectives pored over every photo, every map, every timeline, searching for clues the police might have missed. They debated whether Evan's confession matched the physical evidence. They questioned the autopsy, the timeline, the motives. Some claimed there was a third man involved, someone never charged, never named. And just like that, the tragedy of a friendship gone wrong became a story the internet could own. True crime forums lit up with speculation. Was the confession coerced? Was Sam's death truly an accident turned murder? Or was something darker buried under that highway? One theory suggested that Sam had stumbled upon a local corruption ring, that his disappearance was meant to be permanent. Another claimed he never died at all, that the body wasn't his. It didn't matter that DNA had confirmed it. People wanted mystery more than they wanted closure. And maybe that's the curse of every solved case in the digital age. When truth finally comes to light, the world still reaches for the shadows. Elaine Nordquist tried to stay away from it all. But one night, scrolling through her phone, she found a video thumbnail. A grainy photo of Sam. The title in bold, The Nordquist Conspiracy. What they don't want you to know. It had 3.5 million views. She watched in silence as strangers dissected her brother's life, his habits, his friends, his smile, twisting his story into entertainment. Every detail they exaggerated made the real Sam fade further away. They've turned him into a myth, she said in an interview later. But myths don't have families. My brother did. Meanwhile, the investigation that had finally closed brought unexpected consequences. Journalists began questioning how many other cold cases might hide beneath new construction projects. In neighboring states, crews reported finding old wrecks, missing persons cases dating back to the 60s and 70s. Suddenly, Sam's story wasn't just a story. It was a mirror, reflecting how many people vanish, how many lies live just under the surface of ordinary places. But even as the world looked closer, the line between fact and fiction blurred. Online creators staged reenactments of the disappearance. Tourists visited Clearwater's lake to film mystery vlogs. Teenagers snapped photos beside the memorial plaque, tagging them with #TheVanishedFriend. What began as justice had become something else, a digital ghost story. For some, it felt like exploitation. For others, like resurrection. The truth was still there, somewhere between memory and myth, but it was harder to recognize. Even the detectives who solved the case admitted to mixed feelings. Detective Marla Jensen, now retired, said, "We wanted answers. We got them. But the noise afterward, it drowned out the peace." Maybe that's what happens when truth finally breaks free after 45 years of silence. It doesn't stay pure. It ripples. It bends. It becomes legend, because legends are easier to live within reality. The Nordquist case has sparked new debates about digital ethics in true crime storytelling. The voice trails off, blending into soft wind. In the end, the story of Sam Nordquist became two things at once: a solved crime and an unsolved question about how we tell stories of the dead. Do we remember them, or do we reinvent them? Do we seek justice, or simply entertainment? For Elaine, the answer came one morning when she revisited the site where the car was found. She placed a single sunflower on the plaque and whispered, "Rest now. The world will talk. But I still remember you as you were." Because in the end, truth can't stop people from talking. but it can remind us of what silence costs. When the past refuses to stay buried. Following the recent closure of a Nordquist case, authorities have announced a second investigation tied to the original suspects. The case of Sam Nordquist was supposed to end in peace. After 45 years, the body was found, the confession made, and the truth written in the official reports. But truth, like water, seeps into every crack it can find. And in Clearwater, those cracks were widening. When detectives reopened the files to process the final evidence, something strange surfaced. An old audio tape, mislabeled and nearly destroyed by mold. It wasn't part of the official investigation. It had been recorded by a private investigator in 1979, 1 year after Sam vanished. On it, a man's voice, faint but recognizable, mentioned a second body. Another person who had gone missing around the same time. The name? Lori Kessler, a nursing student from a nearby town. Until then, Lori's case had been treated as unrelated, a young woman who vanished hitchhiking home after a late shift. But the new audio connected her to the same circle of friends that surrounded Sam, including Evan, including Carl. Could it be that the same men who were with Sam on that last night knew more about Lori's disappearance, too? Detective Marla Jensen, still working with the cold case unit, described the moment she heard the tape. It wasn't just eerie. It was like hearing the ghost of an unfinished story whisper through static. The team re-examined everything. The phone records, the photos, even the road maps of 1978. They found a chilling overlap. The last place Lori was seen was less than 5 miles from the stretch of highway where Sam's car was buried. Reporters jumped on it immediately. Headlines exploded. One case solved, another awakened. Frozen truth melts into new mystery. Clearwater's other disappearance. The forgotten girl. The narrative that had once given closure now reopened old wounds. For Elaine Nordquist, it was déjà vu. Another family about to face the same pain, the same waiting, the same half-truths. "It doesn't end," she said quietly to a journalist. "You think you've buried the past, but the past doesn't bury easy." Authorities began a new dig near an abandoned bridge that once crossed Clearwater Creek, a route long closed off after the flood of 1983. Locals gathered behind yellow tape as excavators tore through layers of soil and rock. Then came the moment that froze everyone in place. A fragment of metal, then glass, and finally a door handle. Another car. Same make, same year. Half buried, half forgotten. Forensic teams confirmed it within hours. The vehicle matched the missing report filed for Lori Kessler in 1978. It was a mirror image of Sam's discovery. Different victim, same pattern, same silence. What were the odds? Investigators began piecing together what now looked like a chain of cover-ups. Not one isolated crime, but a series of accidents that may have been intentional. Maybe 2 people got in the way of something larger. Maybe one night went wrong twice. The community that had finally exhaled in relief was pulled right back into chaos. Evan, already serving his sentence for manslaughter, was suddenly under scrutiny again. Did he confess to Sam's death to hide a bigger truth? Did he take the fall to protect someone else? When questioned, his response was cryptic. "You think you found everything? You haven't even dug deep enough." Online theorists went wild. Podcasters speculated about ritual connections, small-town corruption, even law enforcement collusion from the original investigation. The internet resurrected both victims as part of one chilling headline. The Clearwater vanishings, 2 friends, 2 graves, one truth hidden for decades. But behind the frenzy was something quieter, something human. 2 families, bound by tragedy, both left to wonder if the same lies had stolen their futures. For Detective Jensen, the new discovery wasn't victory. It was heartbreak all over again. "It's like chasing shadows," she said. "Every answer uncovers another ghost." The Nordquist case, once hailed as a model of closure, had now become a haunting parable of what happens when justice takes too long. The evidence may fade. The truth may scatter. But guilt has a way of surviving everything, even time. The lies that built the truth. Case file 78 to 211. Evidence log incomplete. Item 4B missing. Shattered that illusion. During the renewed investigation into Lori Kessler's disappearance, a retired records clerk named Walter Ames came forward. He'd kept copies, unofficial copies, of case logs that were meant to have been destroyed decades ago. Inside a faded manila envelope, investigators found proof that evidence had been tampered with in 1979, items removed from the Nordquist and Kessler case boxes by someone inside the department. The signature on the chain of custody form? Detective Ray Harker, Evan's uncle. The revelation stunned the Clearwater Police Department. For years, the narrative had been simple. A tragic accident, a guilty friend, justice delayed but delivered. But now, that narrative cracked wide open. It wasn't just negligence. It was cover-up. Ray Harker had retired honorably in 1995, celebrated as one of the county's longest-serving officers. But the logs revealed that he'd personally signed out 2 sealed evidence bags the same week the Kessler file was closed. One containing a necklace found at the creek, the other a blood-stained blanket recovered from Sam Nordquist's truck. Neither were ever logged back in. When confronted, Harker, now in his late 70s, sat silently through 2 hours of questioning. Then, in a moment caught on a single camera, he whispered, "You don't understand. They told me it would ruin the town." That statement, simple but devastating, cracked open the final layer of this decades-old mystery. Who was them? As reporters dug deeper, names began surfacing. Local journalists uncovered that in the late 70s, the construction company responsible for developing the Clearwater Bypass, the very project that later unearthed Sam's car, had been run by a small network of city officials and police investors. The same company had once employed Evan Harker and Dylan Price, and buried in its financial records, payments, unexplained, signed off by the sheriff's office, dated weeks after Sam vanished. It all fit together like the edge pieces of a long-lost puzzle. Sam wasn't just a random victim. He had been working part-time maintenance for that construction firm. Lori had been interning at the same company's medical supply affiliate. Both had stumbled upon something they weren't supposed to see: forged safety reports, inflated contracts, environmental violations hidden from federal inspectors. If the theory held true, Sam and Lori hadn't just disappeared by accident. They had been silenced. When the cold case division confronted the surviving suspects, one detail returned like a ghost. Evan's last words in Chapter 10. "You think you found everything? You haven't even dug deep enough." He wasn't talking about dirt or graves. He meant records. Literal evidence buried beneath the very highway built to erase the past. So they dug, this time not for bodies, but for proof. Under the foundations of Highway 16, investigators found a small steel box sealed in concrete. Inside, 3 undeveloped film rolls, 1 rusted revolver, and a piece of folded paper. When processed, the film revealed blurred nighttime photos, headlights reflecting off wet asphalt, silhouettes of 3 men near a car by the lake. And in the corner of one frame, the outline of a woman's necklace, the same one missing from evidence. The revolver was matched through ballistics to one found near Sam's car, though degraded. And the paper, though mostly illegible, contained a name scrawled in ink. Lori. It wasn't enough to convict, but it was enough to confirm what Sam's mother, what Lori's family, what Clearwater had refused to believe for decades. These weren't coincidences for the families. The truth was both a relief and a curse. After 45 years, closure came with the realization that those sworn to protect had once helped bury their pain. Elaine Nordquist said it best during a memorial service. "I thought I wanted answers, but the truth hurts more than the not knowing ever did." And for the detectives, for those who had dedicated years to uncovering this truth, there was no celebration. Only the quiet understanding that justice delayed can often mean justice denied. The Nordquist and Kessler cases were finally closed. But in Clearwater, people still say that on cold nights when fog rolls off the lake, you can hear the hum of an old engine under the water. A reminder that some roads never really end. The road remembers. Every story has an ending. But some endings aren't written. They're found, buried in dirt, frozen in silence, or whispered by the few who dare to look back. The story of Sam Nordquist and Lori Kessler was one such ending, a road that took 45 years to tell the truth. When construction workers first uncovered Sam's car, they didn't just find a vehicle. They unearthed an entire generation's secret. And when Lori's car was discovered months later, the silence that had blanketed Clearwater for decades began to crack open. Detective Marla Jensen, weary but unyielding, stood at the excavation site one last time. Reporters were gone. The headlines had moved on. But for her, and the families left behind, the road was still alive, humming with ghosts of what it had buried. It was never about just finding a body, Jensen later said in her statement. It was about finding who buried the truth. Forensic results eventually confirmed the impossible. The DNA from both crime scenes connected directly to Gerald Hume's brother-in-law, the construction foreman. He had died in the early 1990s, taking his secrets to the grave. But journals recovered from his old property suggested something chilling. That both deaths were covered up to protect an illegal side operation that ran through the construction crew, smuggling and insurance fraud tied to missing vehicles. Sam and Lori? They weren't supposed to die. They just stumbled into the wrong truth. In a press release 45 years too late, Clearwater County finally amended the case files to reflect the truth. Homicide, not accidental death, not runaway. Just two innocent people whose stories have been paved over, literally and figuratively. At the memorial, Elaine Nordquist placed a white rose by a small plaque engraved with her son's name. She spoke quietly, her words carried by the wind. The road doesn't take you, Sam. It brings you home. Nearby, Lori's surviving sister stood with tears streaming down her face. Two families, two gravestones, one endless road. For Detective Jensen, the closure came not with handcuffs, but with truth. Justice isn't always a courtroom, she told a documentary interviewer. Sometimes justice is a story finally told, one the world can't ignore anymore. And so, the road that once silenced Sam and Lori now carry their names in whispers. Drivers pass over it daily, unaware that beneath the asphalt lies a history of betrayal, friendship, and loss. But the land remembers. Time remembers. The road remembers. Because in every disappearance, there's always more than one kind of death. The first is when the person is lost. The second is when their story fades. But when someone refuses to stop asking questions, the story lives again. If Sam and Lori's story teach us anything, it's this. Truth doesn't die, it waits. Sometimes buried under concrete, sometimes hidden behind friendships, but it always waits for someone brave enough to uncover it. There's something about true crime stories like this one, something that stays with you long after the screen fades to black. Because these aren't just stories. They're lives, real people, real pain, real loss. And behind every name we mention, Sam Nordquist, Lori Kessler, and countless others, there's a family still waiting for justice, still hoping for the truth to finally breathe again. For decades, silence protected the guilty. But what breaks that silence is people like you. People who listen, who share, who refuse to let these stories vanish. Every view, every comment, every time you hit like or share a video like this, you're helping to resurface forgotten cases. You become part of something larger, a community of truth seekers who will not stop until every unanswered question finds its ending. If you felt something tonight, if Sam and Lori's story struck a chord with you, then don't just move on. Stay with us. Join this growing movement that believes no case is too cold, no voice too small, and no truth too buried. Click subscribe to our channel at Dark Truth 25 and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next investigation. We post daily updates, deep dives into unsolved disappearances, murder mysteries, and cold cases that deserve to be reopened, or at least remembered. Every single day, we shine a light on a different story. Sometimes it's about the victims. Sometimes it's about the investigators who won't stop digging. And sometimes it's about the people like you who choose to keep listening when the world looks away. Leave a comment below. Tell us what you think really happened to Sam Nordquist. Was this a cover-up gone wrong? A desperate accident buried in fear? Your perspective matters. Because here, at Dark Truth 25, we don't just tell stories, we build them together. Your comments help guide what we look into next. Your voice is part of the investigation. So if you believe every story deserves a spotlight, if you believe silence should never be stronger than truth, then take one simple action right now. Like this video, share it with others who care about justice. Subscribe and join our community of listeners who demand answers. The story of Sam Nordquist doesn't end here. Tomorrow, we uncover another truth, another secret, another case that refuses to stay buried. So check back daily. Every sunrise brings another question waiting for light. And until then, remember, truth isn't lost, it's waiting. Waiting for someone brave enough to listen. You've been watching Dark Truth 25, where the shadows speak, and justice finally whispers back.